Hello, welcome to my channel. This is the Multipolar Dispatch channel. This is episode 5. Today we're going to talk about how the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is building the Global South. Today's episode will be narrated by George. Thank you.
The Architecture of Rise, How the BRI is Building the Global South Act 1. If you only followed the Western media, you'd think the global economy was descending into chaos. The headlines are always the same: debt trap diplomacy, Chinese expansionism, authoritarian influence. But if you look at where the concrete is actually being poured, a completely different story emerges. Right now, the largest infrastructure project in modern history is quietly reshaping the global economy, and it's happening largely outside Western control, while Washington issues statements. The Global South is building ports, railways, industrial corridors, power grids, digital networks, in other words, the foundations of an alternative economic system. For more than 2 centuries, developing nations had very few choices. If you wanted to build infrastructure, you went to the IMF or the World Bank, and those loans almost always came with conditions: austerity, privatization, political compliance. But today, that monopoly is beginning to fracture. Through China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, countries across Africa, Latin America and Asia are no longer waiting for permission to develop. They are building the physical backbone of a multipolar world. And today on the Multipolar Dispatch, we're looking past the propaganda to examine the real architecture of Rise. Because this story isn't just about infrastructure, it's about sovereignty, it's about industrialization. And ultimately, it's about who controls the future of global development. Act 2, the new logistical grid. To understand how power is shifting, you first have to understand logistics. For generations, South America was trapped inside a colonial trade structure. Think about the geography. If Peru or Brazil wanted to export copper, lithium, or agricultural goods to Asia, their cargo often had to travel thousands of unnecessary kilometers north through the Panama Canal or around Africa. That meant dependence on Western-controlled shipping systems and trade hubs. But now that system is changing. This is the Chancay megaport in Peru, built under the BRI framework. It is South America's first true deep-water Pacific hub, and strategically that changes everything. For the first time, the world's largest container ships can dock directly on South America's Pacific coast. Transit times to Asia drop dramatically, in some cases by nearly 20 days. Trade becomes faster, cheaper, and far more independent. South America no longer has to move through North American bottlenecks. It can trade directly across the Pacific on its own terms, and this is much bigger than one port. Infrastructure creates gravity. Once major transport corridors appear, investment follows, manufacturing follows, industrialization follows. Look at Brazil. Trade with China has now surged past $158 billion. But this is no longer just about exporting soybeans or iron ore. Chinese capital is now funding EV manufacturing, telecommunications infrastructure, industrial production inside Brazil itself. The same pattern is emerging in Chile. Chile possesses some of the world's most important lithium reserves. Under the old model, raw lithium would simply be extracted, exported, and refined elsewhere, then sold back as expensive finished products. But under the BRI framework, Chinese firms are investing directly into Chile's domestic refining capacity. That means Chile moves higher up the value chain, from resource supplier to industrial participant. And this is the part mainstream media rarely discusses. Infrastructure creates choices, creates leverage, and leverage is the foundation of sovereignty. Act 3. Breaking the colonial equation. Nowhere is this struggle for economic sovereignty more visible than in Africa. For nearly a century, Africa's relationship with the global economy followed a brutally simple formula. Resources went out, very little came back. The colonial powers built infrastructure, but only the kind designed for extraction. Railways ran from inland mines directly to coastal ports. No regional integration, no domestic industrialization, no internal economic development. Just a one-way pipeline for raw materials. The BRI is systematically breaking that model. China-Africa trade has now reached nearly $300 billion. But the real story isn't the trade figures, it's what is being built. Take Kenya's standard gauge railway. This wasn't simply a rail line connecting a mine to a harbor. It transformed domestic logistics. Transport costs between Mombasa and Nairobi fell dramatically. Cargo moved faster. Businesses expanded. Supply chains improved. And then there's Ethiopia. Rather than relying purely on foreign aid programs that often disappear into bureaucracy, BRI investment focused heavily on industrial parks and manufacturing zones. Today, Ethiopia exports textiles, leather goods, manufactured products, an industrial workforce is emerging. That matters enormously because no nation becomes wealthy by exporting raw materials alone. And then we arrive at the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC sits at the absolute center of the global green energy transition. Its reserves of cobalt and copper are critical for electric vehicle batteries and modern electronics. Under the old system, Western corporations extracted the ore, while most of the profits left the country. The environmental damage stayed behind. But the newer BRI agreements are changing the terms of engagement. The DRC is increasingly demanding domestic processing, joint equity participation, technology transfers. In other words, more of the value chain stays inside Africa itself. And that deeply unsettles Western institutions, because once countries control processing capacity, they gain pricing power, and pricing power means sovereignty. Act 4, the Digital Silk Road. But the BRI is no longer just about ports and railways. It is increasingly moving into the digital realm. Beijing calls this the Digital Silk Road. For decades, the digital economy depended overwhelmingly on Western systems. American cloud servers, Western payment infrastructure, Western-controlled internet architecture. That left many developing nations vulnerable to sanctions, surveillance, technology restrictions. So Southeast Asia is now building something different. Countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam are deploying regional data centers, BRI-backed 5G systems, new submarine fiber optic networks. One major example is the China Arshin Information Harbor. This is essentially a regional digital ecosystem. Cloud computing, big data infrastructure, smart city systems, integrated fintech platforms, and the strategic implications are enormous. A business owner in rural Indonesia can increasingly access global markets without relying entirely on Western financial infrastructure. At the same time, another major shift is occurring. As labor costs rise inside China, manufacturing is gradually relocating outward into partner economies. But the factories don't arrive empty-handed. They bring machinery, engineering expertise, industrial supply chains, workforce training. Countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh are industrializing far faster than previous generations. And once again, infrastructure is the catalyst. Act 5, the debt trap myth. Now let's address the issue Western critics raise most often, the so-called debt trap. According to the popular narrative, China intentionally lends money to poor countries, expecting them to default so Beijing can seize strategic assets. It's a powerful talking point, but the actual evidence is far more complicated. Multiple studies, including work from Western institutions like Johns Hopkins and Chatham House, have challenged the idea of a coordinated Chinese debt trap strategy. In reality, most debt crises involve multiple lenders, private Western banks, bond markets, multilateral institutions, and domestic governance failures. And when countries like Zambia or Sri Lanka encountered financial crises, China did not seize military control of ports or infrastructure. Instead, Beijing participated in lengthy debt restructuring negotiations. Loan maturities were extended, interest rates were reduced, liquidity support was provided. Why? Because a stable trading partner is worth far more than a collapsed economy. At the same time, the BRI itself is evolving. In 2021, Beijing halted support for new overseas coal plants. Since then, investment has increasingly shifted toward solar, hydro, wind, renewable infrastructure. This is not simply environmental idealism. It is also strategic economics. Energy independence matters. Countries trapped importing expensive oil and gas remain vulnerable. Countries with domestic renewable capacity gain resilience. And increasingly, the BRI is shifting away from simple loan structures altogether. More projects now involve joint ventures, equity participation, shared risk investment models. In other words, both sides now have a stake in long-term success. Act 6, Conclusion. The rise of the Global South is not an accident, and it is not a gift from the West. It is being built deliberately through infrastructure, through industrialization, through long-term strategic investment. The Belt and Road Initiative has broken the old monopoly on development finance. For the first time in generations, many nations now have alternatives, and alternatives create leverage. The old unipolar system depended heavily on financial dependency and structural control. The emerging multipolar system is being built on connectivity, industrial capacity, and shared economic growth. The Global South is no longer waiting for permission to develop, it is building its own future. One railway, one port, one industrial corridor at a time. Thanks for joining us here at the Multipolar Dispatch. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave a comment below, and let us know how the BRI is impacting your region. And we'll see you on the next dispatch.